Thank you so much for tuning in to our People Who Think for the month of March, excuse me. It is Women's History Month, and we have some great panelists here today. My name is Demetrias Wolverton, and I am the Mission Impact Manager for YWCA Kalamazoo. Being that it is Women's History Month, we have a great theme for you, which is women of color are new to this, they're true to this. And on the panel today, we have guest Haley Mangrum, who is Assistant Director of Student Engagement at Western Michigan University. We have Namita Sharma, who is a local attorney here in Kalamazoo at Bergman and Sharma Attorneys at Law, and who is also a community volunteer and activist. And then we have Elena Morales Hill, who is a community investment officer at Kalamazoo Community Foundation. Thank you so much, you guys, for joining us today and supporting the YWCA in our efforts and having this crucial conversation and really changing and shifting the narrative around the influential role that women of color have had in our country, in our history. I would like to kick off with a very basic question on who is a woman of color that has been very influential in your life and has created a path for you.
You know, I don't think that, you know, any of us could be sitting here if we didn't have family members who helped pave the way. And so right away, the first woman that comes to mind is my grandmother, Maria Luisa Garza, who immigrated here from Mexico and did backbreaking work in migrant farm worker fields in California in order to provide for her family and to be able to provide them better opportunities than she had. She was really committed to education, and I think because of that, that allowed different opportunities for my aunts and uncles, in which provided a different opportunity for me to be able to even sit here with you today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Would someone else like to share or talk about someone who has been influential in their life and created a path for them?
I think for me, obviously my grandmother, my mom's mom, and then obviously my mom. There's not a day that goes by I'm like, how the heck does she do all those things in one day, right? And so for me, it taught me a lot of resiliency, a backbone, never accept no as an answer type of deal that got me started in advocacy work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're talking about advocacy work or shifting into that. We know that that is something that is very, very, or is heightened right now in our climate. Everyone is doing advocacy work, right? We have people who are organizing in all different facets. We have institutions, we have grassroots, we have students, we have so much going on. However, women of color have always organized around advocacy work, and I think that's not highlighted enough. Does anyone want to talk a little bit about that and how they organize around advocacy work in their current role?
Well, I mean, I think the theme of today is really important right now. Women of color are not new to this. There has been a struggle from the very beginning for so many. And when you talk about people who paved the way, you know, women of color don't have the luxury or the privilege to take a back seat and to make change. Women of color have always had to do things that break the norm, that advocate, because skin color is the first thing that oftentimes people see when you walk in the room, or your name being different for immigrants who may blend in. And for those who consider themselves to be white, that is a privilege. They don't have to, because of their privilege, they don't have to live in that environment. So you're always judged. And so advocacy comes naturally because that's where you are from initially, because of what people are looking through their eyes at you as, and putting you in a box, so to speak. And then I think from that naturally comes the need to make changes and to help others and have empathy and to work together in making changes. So from the beginning, you know, you think about Emmett Till's mother, who said, you know, my baby will be in an open casket to see what was done to him. She had a choice, but she was saying, no, this is going to be a statement for the world to know what happens. Because if you don't speak up, if you don't come to those meetings and events and say, this is what the historical context has been, or what has been done traditionally to people, then you are not helping anything. You're not helping to make change. So women of color, I think, have no choice, and they have been doing this. And now I think other people are catching up.
Absolutely.
I think that's why it's kind of like a lot of the movements. It's like a fad. It's like, okay, what we protesting today, y'all? And so like a women's march, like I didn't go to any of the women's marches this past, like since the last presidential election, because I felt like there was no intersectionality in the movement, right? And so it's almost as if it's a sign contest versus an actual advocacy platform to push things forward for women, or for people who don't benefit from systems, right? And so it's like we've been doing it. You know what I'm saying? Like, duh, like it's not a matter of, oh, we need you to develop grit. We have it because we don't have the option to not have it, right? So that's what comes to mind.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think specifically, you know, in my role here locally, I know that a lot of our institutions have not created great access for women of color in our community. Kalamazoo is not immune to this, right? And so I think in the role that I have, I think whether formally or informally, have tried to open up doors for women of color in our community, as we have a kind of bird's eye view of what's happening in the community. And we see women of color are holding our community in so many ways, in the social sector specifically, deep on the ground in our neighborhoods. And so how to be able to create space for their voices, for their passions, for their great ideas and you know, plans to be able to develop our community further. How can we give them a platform? You know, how can we allow those dreams to come true and help collaborate with them and help them to build capacity where they need it? Because women of color are so strong. Like I said, we've been carrying our communities for so long. It's just being able to have access to resources and platforms to be able to continue to be elevated, I think. You know.
So we talk about women of color being underrepresented, not having access. We talk about intersectionality, and specifically the Y has a mission to eliminate racism and empower women, knowing that we cannot empower all women if we do not eliminate racism. And so I want to ask you, what are your guys' thoughts on intersectional feminism? And how has it impacted or not impacted advocacy efforts, whether in the past or present?
So intersectionality is something that if it doesn't become part of what you do as an advocate, whether you're a person who considers yourself white or whether you're a person of color, you're missing out on a huge part of what needs to be brought to the table to affect change. And so I think it's a natural thing, and you learn from all of those voices at the table. So if the intersectionality is not intentional and part of what's going on, you're missing out on so many important parts of what needs to be done to change, who needs to make voices available, and at those tables where decisions are being made. That is hard to do. That is intentional work, intersectionality in feminism, in anti-racism work, in anti-violence work, promoting LGBTQ rights, all of that. Those are natural alliances anyway, because these are advocating for breaking what has been the norm or what has been a bad practice. So I think that feminists, if you consider yourself that, I know that for some people they don't understand that that is what they are, even if they're not describing themselves as feminists. But historically, I think there have been those alliances, even though at times women of color in the movement, for instance, when it was Women's Equality Day, we've always celebrated this, but pointed out at the YWCA that women of color were left out of this intentionally, sold out essentially, so that white women could get the vote. And those things have to be remembered, and then everybody has to be brought to the table to show that these issues they cross over.
I think for me, is the term that came to mind was white is right. And so from a child, I was taught like white is right. So white is traditional, white is the norm, white is like that's what everything is based off of in society. And so when you talk about intersectionality, and when I say like I can't be a woman without being black, to some of my white counterparts, it doesn't make sense to them, right? Because they're like, okay, your race, but we're talking about women, like all women. Baby, like you need to recognize my race. So like when people are like, oh, regardless of race, it's because of your race. We're bringing like we're incorporating this into our initiative. And so to kind of, you have to be you know what I'm saying? Like that. That's what makes me I am. The reason why I'm a woman is because I'm black. Like I'm a black woman. Like I can't see one without the other.
Right.
If that makes sense.
That's right.
Right. Yeah, and I think all of us come from really rich identities and backgrounds, but not any one of us can speak for our whole community. And, you know, for me as a Chicana, there are 10 other Chicanas that can be right alongside me that are going to have a different way of living that identity out, and other intersections that they have, you know, as well. So, you know, I think there's always more intersectionality we can bring to the table. We should always be asking ourselves, who is not here? Who else needs to be represented? And yet, we're not going to probably get everybody always, but do our best to continue striving to bring in more voices. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's also important to know that with intersectionality comes controversy, right? Because we know that oftentimes that the individuals who may be leading the movement or the initiative or whatever is going on in the community at that time may not be a representation or a holistic representation of the women who are most impacted or where the disparity lies at, and which creates a barrier when trying to have effective outcomes. And so the question that I have is, in what spaces, in regards to advocacy efforts and social justice movements, do you see women of color underrepresented, and what are your thoughts on that?
You know, I think with, you know, definitely we're seeing, with some of our grassroots movements, we're seeing more women of color at the forefront. When we're looking at Black Lives Matters, when we're looking at the immigration and DACA reform work, and the Me Too, right? I mean, this is, I mean, you know, for some, I don't want to say some of the first times, but it's in a certain way right now that it's happening, and that's really great. But, you know, in many ways, it's like where women of color have been underrepresented overall in the feminist movement as a whole, and, you know, and I think about, if it's not even in movement building, but intersecting with our political system, our economic system, our governmental systems, women of color are way underrepresented. And yet we know all those systems are impacting our communities and women of color, and specifically in more than any other group. You know, they're at the bottom of the totem pole. And so I think about where are those spaces to continue to build movements in those areas and to intersect with those different types of institutions and systems. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always more work to be done. Right now, we're at a time when it feels like the dominant conversation is about Me Too. But that's just very recent, and it took a lot of effort to get people to come to that realization that this is a problem. Women who've been suffering from discrimination, sexual harassment, those types of things, they know. They've been experiencing it for a long time, and usually these are women at the lowest level of the socioeconomic strata. So those folks are often missing from the table in these conversations. You know, in these, whether it's a nonprofit or a boardroom, always diverse voices, and I don't like the word diverse specifically, but I'm talking about, you know, that always is like, oh, diversity, what does that really mean? I mean, you know, there is, we're not talking about just having a representation and a tokenism, so to speak, but actually listening to what people have to say because of their experience. I've had conversations in those settings where people, white men who didn't think of things that way and didn't realize that there was a different perspective or a way of looking at something. That's really important. Because if you're not listening to those things, you're not then able to affect change or address the needs of that type of a person who comes from that type of a background, whether it's a poor person or a person of color or a woman who's had you know, struggles, and from a minority perspective, of course, that's always something that people need to learn about and hear. And if you're privileged enough to not have to ever cross over into those areas, then you can live your life and not have to worry about it. In some ways, you know, we're more segregated than ever in our schools, for instance, if you're looking at different communities, et cetera. So I think at every opportunity, when you're talking about advocacy, it can be just being on different boards, different, you know, community meetings, and having that voice. Don't you think that that's the most important thing, bringing that, and bringing more people on?
And I think part of it is, not all, I don't know, but white folks need to get white folks together. And so part of that is, it's not a matter of having, okay, it's 5 of us at the table, but we're all white. We need somebody of color. We need somebody who's this. We need somebody, You need to understand these lived experiences so you can go forth and advocate or make policy or do whatever you need. And so, because you don't want it to become a tokenized system, and oftentimes that's what it becomes, or it's like, oh shoot, we need some diversity training, right? Because I don't like that word. So you bring in somebody, and oh look, they're of color, teaching us, right? And so it's like a constant burden, like it's never ending.
That's right.
And specifically on women of color, because we're doing it, and you may be somebody's admin assistant, and you're telling the director like different things, or you may be assistant director, or you're telling people higher up, and that person benefits off of your lived experience.
Right.
They get promoted, they get a higher salary, whereas you're still, you know what I'm saying, you're at your baseline. And so I think it's a lot of stuff that goes unnoticed in the informal conversations that happen in the workplace and in the community.
And I think that even sheds light to some of the conversations that are referencing about Me Too, that it was initially started by women of color, and it wasn't in 2018 or 2017.
It was a long time ago.
You know, she started that hashtag a while ago, and then you know we had some celebrities who majority identified as white women started to use the hashtag, and then it blew up, right? And then it became this social media campaign. It became a hot thing, let me retweet this, let me do this. And I think that speaks to, again, the plight that women of color carry. They have the answers, they have their lived experiences, and they even have the key people that they can bring to the table, and they do that. And then people who don't represent those communities or them benefit from it. They go off and they become governors and directors and CEOs, and they draft legislation and do research in communities and sell it for $20,000. Like, how do we begin to have conversations around truth telling that are really giving women of color the space and opportunity that they need? We see it all the time, specifically in the Alabama election. Women of color came out and literally saved the state from what could have been something that was very catastrophic. And then they have to go back to their job, right? They have to go back to their jobs, have to go back to being mothers, have to go back to all these different things after they literally just say this, wake up the next day and like business as usual. And that is something that people are okay with turning a blind eye to. It doesn't matter how we frame the conversation. It doesn't matter where we have it at. It doesn't matter who's at the table. It's something that people are oftentimes turning a blind eye to that. And how do we combat that in a way that's effective?
Right.
I don't have I know we usually have the answers. Haley does not have the answers. I have radical answers, but I don't have the right answers. But the first thing that came to mind is Black Panther. And when the princess said, when they brought in the CIA agent or whatever he was, Agent Ross, and she said, oh, another broken white boy for us to fix. And so it's just like, we always are fixing people's problems. It's like, okay, well, let me cook this food, but let me go fix their problem and then come back and deal with my own life. And so we're carrying that into our personal life, which could then affect your family or then affect your friendships and the relationships that you have within your intimate life or personal life outside of work. So it's not sustainable in our society because oftentimes women get burnt out from being a part of
That's exactly right.
Absolutely.
That's why bringing other, I think, women of color, you're not the only one at the table, and sharing that opportunity or burden.
Right, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that as kind of has been mentioned, that we carry a lot of burden. We carry burdens for our communities, for our families, in our workplaces, sometimes being the only person of color, you know, that's represented. And so we know that we carry a lot of stress in our bodies, literally from that, you know, and we're not always great at taking care of ourselves, you know, as women of color, you know, and I do think about how can we think about more sustainable ways of support systems, you know, whether it is alongside in leadership or other alternative ways to have ongoing support for our women of color, or also mentorship and leadership training for women that they can have real platforms to be able to, you know, exercise their leadership and also do it in sustainable ways. But it's hard to always have models to be able to follow or people to be able to mentor you in it. So often we feel alone in this work, I think. And, you know, and we'll give ourselves where we can, or people will take advantage of us in the you know, where they can. We're not always advocating for ourselves, and we need people to help empower us to continue to advocate for ourselves, in those processes, so.
Right.
And we talk a lot about offering development opportunities and in leadership development or whatever that looks like. And I really want to have the conversation about women of color are leading right now in higher education, credentials, degrees, whether it's masters or PhDs, are leading. They have attained education credentials more than any other subgroup in the country, yet there's a disparity amongst women of color being CEOs and political positions. So I don't know if leadership development is actually what the country needs or what women of color need. I think it's just really a shift. Like, are we being intentional with our hiring practices? Are we being intentional with who we're recruiting and how we're recruiting? Do we have packages, employee benefit packages that are holistic and fit the needs for women of color? You know, we right now in YWCA Kalamazoo, we're leading an initiative around Cradle Kalamazoo, you know, infant mortality.
Right.
And we have, although income and social economic status is a social determinant, it's not a protective factor.
Right. No.
Attaining education as a woman of color, attaining higher pay, income, or employment, that doesn't protect you from health disparities. It doesn't, whether it's mental health, physical health, it doesn't protect you from those things. And I think that we turn a blind eye to a lot of that stuff. It has, and we don't know how to get to the root issue or the root cause. I firmly believe it's systems and policies and practices and what that looks like. And I also think it's the people who are in position of power. We literally have people who can, at the swipe of a pen, can end disparities in our community, can do these recruitment efforts, and they're not happening. And I don't know what conversations should be had or what should be had or what the strategic methods are, but I think that we need to work towards that relentlessly. I think that, you know, we always say, well, we're gonna get this far, and then we're gonna come back for you, and then we're gonna get this far, and then we're gonna come back for you. And so, how do we streamline a process that's working simultaneously?
Yeah.
That we're like, so everyone's going at the same time, and no one's coming back for anyone, because we know that no one comes back, right?
Right. No, and I agree with you. I think things have to be done, you know, simultaneously. It's not just women are developed. I think you also have to have a platform for them to, or, you know, environments that they're going to thrive also in, because you can get women into you know, powerful positions, and they can go so far, but they're going to continue to see some of those ongoing barriers and be oppressed within those different systems. So I agree with you. I do think it is simultaneous development.
I think recognizing the environment. And so if I could be qualified and have everything you need, but you want me to move into a rural area where nobody looks like me, and if I go to the local store or the beauty supply, Sally's, and none of my hair care products are there, and none of the food I eat is local. And so that is a disparity in my lived environment, right? And so I can't even be whole. We talk about being a whole person at work. I can't do that because I don't have my basic needs, right? I'm still traveling 2 hours out of where I live to get my hair done. Like, I have to plan that in advance versus my white counterparts can just go to work. I have a hair appointment, see y'all in a second, and you go 10 minutes up the street, right? And so these are things that people of color have to think about. And so if I'm moving into an area, that needs to be set in a benefits package or some other opportunities, but it takes the system and the organization, the institution, to recognize that need. And oftentimes we don't, because we say, oh, this is an open place, welcome everybody, diversity, let's celebrate. No, you need to recognize that and implement some systems or some policies, some practices to help me succeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. You have some very powerful individuals and influential, you know, you have attained, like, you all have education requirements, or met the education requirements, excuse me. You have very influential roles in the community, and I'm sure on a daily basis there are some things that are occurring, some microaggressions that you are running into. And it's like, why did I even go? It's like, why you're like having that self-conversation, like, why did I go to school? Or why, like, if this is what I did all this for? And so I think that it's important to offer space for those experiences to be shared. And I think that that's why, you know, the purpose of People Who Think is to really engage in this risky conversation, because it is a risky conversation, right? You know, when you speak up, you put yourself on the line. You put your job security on the line. You put your reputation on the line, especially when you get into truth telling, you know, and it's just like, what can I negotiate within myself to begin to advocate? And so I would like to talk a little bit about negotiation or what that looks like on a daily basis from some of your lived experiences, because you can't walk into work like we have a space right now where you can talk about these confrontational things or some things that may be controversy around them. However, when you're in your space, you're negotiating like, should I speak up now or should I not speak up now? What's the best way to strategically move and those things like that. And so I would like to open up the space for you guys to share a little bit about that if you feel comfortable.
I think for me, I'm the youngest person on the panel, I'll just assume. But a part of that is, I think my generation, my mom's generation is more so, oh, you just got to play the game. You just got to play the game. Like my dad and my mom, you just got to play the game. You got to play them people game, and then get your stuff and keep it moving.
Yep.
And I'm like, I don't want to play the game. Like, I'm sick of buying pieces, and I'm sick of, like, I'm tired of playing the game because I'm just as qualified, if not more, than somebody that may be higher than me. And so I think for me, I've always been a challenge the process type of person from day one. My mom said since kindergarten, right? And so for me, I've always challenged systems since that's just my nature. And so figuring out how to negotiate that with my relationships, like in the workplace, and so leveraging them. So, oh, I know so-and-so, I'm cool with so-and-so, so let me finesse real quick, and then we can get to square one. So I think for me, it's figuring out a pathway to get there versus bringing it up, because I'm going to bring it up. It's just a matter of how, when, and where. And I think a lot of times, I was telling one of my students this yesterday, you have to pick your battles. Like, if you fight everything, every microaggression that comes to you, you're going to be, girl, you're not going to make it home.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're not going to make it home. So you have to pick it and leverage it to where, is this worth my time, like in my energy? Because like we talked about earlier, you don't want to burn out from this work.
Right. That's it.
Absolutely.
And I think you shed light on the importance of, you made a comment of like, such and such, such and such, this is how I move strategically. And I think along the lines, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think along that lines, there are some really effective allies, right, who aren't women of color, whether they're men, whether they're white women, that really understand and get it, and who you can build and cultivate those authentic relationships with. And I think it's important that we do highlight that, although women of color are new to this, that there are some women out there who aren't women of color who understand or have empathy and can help or want to assist with moving that forward, because they have access to spaces that some folks don't have access to. And I think that's important as well, to include that piece in there. However, I would like to thank you for tuning in to Our People Who Think. I hope you really enjoyed the conversation today. If you would like to see more, please follow us on Facebook at YWCA KZoo. Thanks so much, and see you next month.